Hello and welcome to Penelope Crystalfink reluctantly defends feminism in the year of our Lord 2025. My name is Penelope Crystalfink. I'm an author, I'm a YouTuber. I wish to dedicate this presentation to one of my favorite YouTubers. His channel is called the Kavernacle. I've watched him off and on for years. I like his content. I tend to listen to a lot of people from Britain and other parts of Europe. Um, and I like him because he has a degree in international relations. I studied international relations, although I didn't complete my master's degree. So my hat's off to him. I used to be a subscriber. Sorry, I'm not a subscriber anymore. My husband and I are being really cheap while we leave the country. So this is the agenda for this presentation. Today, I hope to cover history, my history with feminism. um, this channel that I've weirdly stumbled into, Psychobabble with Dr. Spier, white flight narratives and the manipulation of crime stats in Europe. Something I like to call the clinical psychologist, psychiatrist to far right pipeline, and my take on diagnoses as a psychiatric survivor. Um, I am myself a psychiatric survivor. If you are familiar with my channel, there are numerous videos on my psychiatric history, as well as my experience with child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, the criminal justice system. I'm a former crime reporter and newspaper reporter. I don't have any big league credentials to share with you. I only have a bachelor's in English. I did write a book on mass shooters. But consider myself kind of an armchair forensic psychologist, although I never want people to misconstrue me. I don't have a degree in psychology. And like I said before, I have an interest in international relations. I'm the author of 3 books, one of which was published by a small press in Canada, and the other 2 are self-published. So one is a book of essays. It's sort of an autobiography. The other is the book about mass shooters. It's called Strange Fire in a Vacuum. All of them are available on Amazon. Okay, so let's talk about my history with feminism. And my early, I guess, encounters with it were when I went to college. Now, I was so unstable mentally that I went to 4 different undergraduate colleges. Um, and I was rather mouthy and right wing at the time. I came from Texas. I was born in the early 80s. Right after I graduated high school, I got involved with somebody who is now had a long career as a professional political commentator on the right. His name is Kevin Williamson, and he currently writes for the Dispatch, although he spent many years at National Review. Now, when I went to college, what was happening was I was already married. I got married my sophomore year, and I was 19, 20, and then I immediately enrolled myself at Bryn Mawr because I had the grades to get in, and this is how naive I was. I thought, well, this is a women's college, so I'll go to the women's college where I won't have to worry about boys and dating and men and drinking. And I just thought they'll totally get down with my decision as a young person to get married and be a married woman. Like, that's how I saw myself. I'm a grown woman. I made this decision. So then I show up to Bryn Mawr with this pixie chop. And by the way, that's me on the left. That's Katharine Hepburn on the right. I did not dress like this, I wish to say. It's a bit of a misrepresentation. It's actually me a few years after I attended Bryn Mawr and after I graduated college. This is me in 2006. I graduated in 2005, but I ultimately ended up graduating from Temple University in Philadelphia. But I didn't typically dress like this. It's just the only picture that I have of me from this whole era. And I used to model for photographers and life drawing classes. And so there was this guy, and he was like, I want to take pictures of you. God, this shit I used to do. I wouldn't, ugh, it's a good thing I don't have a daughter because the stuff I used to do. So this guy says, I want to take pictures of you in Philly. That was his aesthetic. We went to like blighted neighborhoods where there was like, and he wanted me to dress goth. And so my roommates and I, we threw together this outfit. I didn't ordinarily walk around in a crop top with that was not my look. Although people said I was edgy. Okay, whatever. I was like 96 pounds, soaking wet, and very, very short, and had this pixie chop. And then I show up at Bryn Mawr, married and everything. And people think I'm a lesbian because I have this haircut and I've never been hit on by women, and most of my professors and all the cool kids are all lesbians, and I'm the married girl. That's what they called me. And needless to say, it wasn't a whole lot of fun for me. Socially, I didn't fit in, although I made very good grades, and I actually had a professor of literature, Sandra Berwin, said to me, "You are what the students were like before the Ivy League started accepting women." And I was like, "Really?" And she was like, "Yes, you have spunk." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." Um, then I found out a long time after I dropped out of Bryn Mawr that Katharine Hepburn also went to Bryn Mawr. And I found this picture of her and I thought, oh, was this May Day? Because get this, all the girls on May Day, this is something I didn't attend. 'Cause again, I didn't go to class a lot either. Um, they would dance in these maypole dances around a big giant phallic maypole in these white outfits, and that was May Day. And then they'd be like, "Why did you go to May Day?" And I was like, "What are you doing? You're not even virgins. I don't understand." So anyway, Katharine Hepburn, legend has it, almost got kicked out of Bryn Mawr herself for swimming naked in the cloisters, which is part of the campus there. Um, So, yeah, I thought, is this a Mayday picture? But it's not. It's actually her before she was in some kind of theatrical production play. Okay, so anyway, I wasn't interested in philosophy at all when I was an undergraduate, but I had to take it to satisfy credits. So before I went to Bryn Mawr, I went to Emerson College in Boston because they had a good writing, literature, and publishing program. I took Western Civ there. I took philosophy there. I took ethics twice, once at Emerson, once at Bryn Mawr, and was very interested in the contrast between Emerson's curriculum of ethics and philosophy and Bryn Mawr. At Emerson, we just studied utilitarian ethics, moral relativism. I think we read Kant. I don't remember. It was so long ago. It was taught by a man from Africa, Ajime Wingo, who subsequently hit on me and copped a feel on the T, and then asked me if I wanted to be his TA for the next semester. And I was like, no, I'm getting married. I'm leaving. Bye. So at Bryn Mawr, I once again re-enrolled in classes and took philosophy and ethics and a whole lot of other classes too. Like I had a sociology or an anthropology class, but my main quibble with these classes is that every class I would sign up for somehow became a feminism class. No matter what, it was going to be a feminism class, and I was really not having it at the time. I was like, no, I don't think so. I would argue, I would go home at night and I would present different feminist arguments to my then husband, and he would say, that's bullshit, and blah, 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 blah. And then I would go to school and do the opposite. And I would be treated like with this prickly disdain by my elders and superiors. And so that was what was going on. However, I do recall that in this feminist philosophy class that I had called Ethics, we had to read Carol Gilligan, whom I subsequently came to like admire her work, and Andrea Dworkin. And this was just for me, this was just like I was like, okay, whatever. I read essays by this woman who was claiming that basically all heterosexual sex is rape, or somehow the anatomy to her suggest penetrate just and I would literally sit there in class and bite my tongue and just sort of like pull faces and be like, oh my God, I hope I get raped tonight because this is ridiculous. And one day I did actually been say to my professor, I don't agree with this. And I basically said to her, look, I don't think that I have had it so hard. I don't feel that I have had oppression visited upon me. I feel like I've had the same opportunities and rights as my male counterparts. And I don't really agree with all this affirmative action. Affirmative action was a big thread of our discourse and much more part of the political discourse. We didn't call it wokeism like we are now, we called it political correctness. And so I did clap back at the professor. And so I was just like, whatever. The professor spent the next hour and a half long lecture period because I guess I got so under her skin with whatever it is that I said, delivering a very, she said, first of all, that I was being too subjective, and I was. I was 20 years old at the time. Okay. What, I mean, give me a break. Um, and and then she was going to roll out with, you only feel that way, right? That was her point. You only feel that way because you do have a debt of gratitude that you owe to women who went before you. I mean, she could have said to me, and at the time I wasn't even aware, you know, as late as the 60s and 70s, women couldn't even run or compete in the Boston Marathon. You couldn't even buy sports bras, basic equipment. People were barred, you know, from these things. But I didn't know that. I was mouthy and uninformed, and also coming from a very different place, which we'll discuss later. So this was me. And then the next lecture period, this professor devoted entirely to her own career and the travails and the trials and tribulations of trying to achieve tenure in the male dominated academic discipline of philosophy. And I did not tell her at the time a lot of what I was reacting to was that her points about her hardships didn't really register with me because I grew up in households where women got beat. Um, and it just didn't register with me. So also there was at the time I wasn't really fitting in at Bryn Mawr because there was a lot of classism and I was reacting to it and I did not understand how to articulate, look, I am a kid who grew up on both sides of the tracks. I come from Lubbock, Texas. I'm not a trust fund baby. No one's paying my way. I'm assuming the debt for this. And, if it doesn't work out, I can't go back and live with my mom and my dad because both of them are violent alcoholics. Okay, that's the truth. So, what ended up happening was me having a nervous breakdown, working for a year and a half in the kitchen, endorsing all of my paychecks back to Bryn Mawr to pay for a semester in which I was so disorganized that I effed up my financial aid paperwork and didn't get any financial aid. And then had, a full-blown bell jar meltdown, went back home, lived with my mom, tried to leave my husband, he threatened to kill me, etc., etc. And then they asked me at Bryn Mawr, like, do you want to come back after all this? And I said no, because frankly, I understand now what what this is going to cost me. And so I ended up going to Temple University in the city, which was a huge, very diverse place, and I really loved it. And I didn't feel so like a fish out of water. At Bryn Mawr, things were going on. Like, I remember animal rights was the big thing, and there were all these vegan to this types. And this is what these ladies would do. They would prepare vegan food and then like go to the quad and serve it. And I was like, what are you doing? You're preaching to the choir. I said, why don't you go to the city with that? Why don't you go to Rittenhouse Square? And they were afraid to go to the city. They were afraid of the city. Okay. So then I ended up going to the city, which was great for me, and I graduated summa cum laude, and I actually did let go of my aspiration to double major in psychology and English, which was causing me a problem at Bryn Mawr because they told me that I was on too much financial aid to double major because it might require me to stay an extra semester, and they didn't want to have a student on financial aid do that, which I thought was, again, didn't have the word or the vocabulary for classism at the time, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. So by the time I got to Temple, I was just so eager to just get this college thing over with. I was years behind everybody else. It was embarrassing. And I did study under a wonderful feminist professor. Her name was Rachel Blau Duplessis. And I took women in poetry as my capstone course under her. And she was like the first feminist professor who wouldn't like let me give her shit. And she saw through my bullshit and she sat me down and she was like, sometimes you can be quite cavalier. And I really respected her and I admired her. And at the time, I toyed with the idea of writing a paper or thesis about women like these. So, who are these women? Okay, so starting from this is my Hall of Dysfunctional Music. Starting from the bottom here, this is Vivian Haywood Elliott. She married all the way to the left. She married T.S. Eliot. She was a poet herself. Over here, next to her, larger Frida Kahlo, Mexican painter. Okay, upper right, this is Camille Claudel, and then below Camille, to the right of Frida, is Sylvia Plath. So I became not obsessed, but like fascinated by women's bios like these types of women. Why? Well, I had a lot in common with them. These are some facts about my dysfunctional muses. Vivian Elliott also wrote poetry. She married T.S. Eliot in a bit of a rush and then was institutionalized for the rest of her life. She died in in a hospital. She died in a psychiatric hospital. And she may have had a heart attack, or this may have been a suicide. Sources vary. She would be said today to, in the very least, have something called premenstrual dysmorphic disorder, or very severe hormonal sickness. She would bleed for weeks at a time. She was extremely heavy bleeder. It was irregular. Clearly, there was something medically wrong with her. She also suffered from tuberculosis and had tremendous bouts of mood dysregulation. Frida Kahlo had an accident early in life. She was impaled in a bus wreck. This caused her a lot of problems conceiving, and a lot of pain. She was pierced through her body, and I think the hole actually exited through her pelvis. So then she later married this bombastic fat propagandist named Diego Rivera, who's very celebrated. His murals are communist like iconography. Camille Claudel was also hospitalized by her brother for a large part of her life, most of her adult life, after she had a ruinous affair with the sculptor Auguste Rodin. But she herself was a very, very talented sculptor, and backburned as well. There was a lot of jealousy there. Then finally, Sylvia Plath committed suicide at the age of 32, I think. I get a lot of pushback from people in comment threads, because apparently I'm mean-spirited for pointing out that she committed suicide with her children, her two small children in the next room. And all she did by way of protecting them was put rags under the door and tape off the room. I don't have a lot of sympathy for Miss Plath, although I myself have suffered from severe bouts of depressive episodes. Also been tied to like she was being rejected by publishers at the time. But somehow I survived. And I just tend to think that, it's like I had a friend whose husband, she and her husband had a baby, and he told me once, he said, I was gonna be a great film director. I just wanted to be a great film director, and now here I am with a kid. And I stopped him and I said, you have something, like you have created something far more powerful than any film. You have created another human being, and I don't know why you should feel sorry for yourself for if you didn't achieve your artistic aspirations. To me, I just think, wow. So I don't have a lot of, I'm very ambivalent about Sylvia Plath. Okay. I think it's unfortunate, and I think that is problematic to celebrate her life as this feminist tragedy. So fast forward to what am I doing now? Well, it's now I'm in my middle 40s, and I've discovered that there is a community finally of people speaking out against the psychiatric establishment for what's been years and years and years to me of just bullshit and sweeping a lot of trauma under the rugs. I used to be a great fan of Dr. Joseph Whitduring's channel because he is a whistleblower psychiatrist, and he's talking to a lot of people like myself about their experiences coming off psychiatric medications. I was medicated for a long time because I would say I had mental and emotional issues related to childhood trauma. Okay, and it wasn't right and it wasn't helpful. So I can't help but notice, though, that there are quite a few people in this sort of mental health field or mental health adjacent field. I used to be a fan of this guy in the middle there, Richard Grannon, because he had a lot to say about helping people like myself get over complex post-traumatic stress disorder related to narcissistic abuse, childhood abuse, a lot of stuff that he said was very helpful. And then one day I started realizing that he had um, gone and inserted himself into the manosphere. He's a British dude. He does not have a degree in psychology, but he is enormously popular online, and I'm sure it's quite lucrative for him. Up here is Jordan Peterson. Need I say more? Jordan Peterson has been stripped of his professional credentials because specifically he has become so mean and just how would you even describe it at this point? Nazi-esque, in a way that professional bodies in Canada can no longer suborn. Okay, but this is what's going on. These people wander out, go out on a limb, decide that everything that's wrong in life has to do with, oh, the social justice warriors, and they all suffer from mental illness, and let me tell you. And then they have a moral aphasia going on where they want to use terms and diagnoses to characterize or mischaracterize in a very one-sided way people whose political points they disagree with. So according to all these people, and we'll get to today's number one offender, Dr. Spier, leftist protesters like myself, my husband, I don't know, millions of others who have joined in the No Kings protest, we all don't really know what we're talking about. We just have undiagnosed personality disorders, and all of our outrage is performative and fake. So from Dr. Joseph Whitduring's channel, I was watching him one day, and this woman was his guest of the day, and she has her own channel, Psychobabble with Dr. Spier. Dr. Spier is a Norwegian MD, currently living in Switzerland, not practicing at all because she elected to be a stay-at-home mom, but she does have quite a cult following. I like to call her, Little Red Riding Hood, pick me Dr. Spier. These are her claims. She claims that not having kids causes psychopathology in women, that suffragettes were terrorists, Sweden is the rape capital of the world, feminists should care about immigration, and if we don't get on board with that, we're all fake. It's really a cover for white supremacy, but we'll get to that later. Traditional gender roles are better. Cluster B disorders are underdiagnosed in women and on the rise. Leftists and feminists who protest social conditions in first world countries are exhibiting traits of borderline personality disorder. Lived experience in clinicians and social workers is bullshit, and young women should date with intention in their 20s, get married, and have children earlier rather than later. Okay, well, fine. She even has this, like, she's even said, and she draws on her clinical practice to bolster her points. So, for example, with respect to the last point, which I would have no problem with. I would have no problem with it, except that what happens with Dr. Spear is that you're gonna find that unless you absolutely wholeheartedly and but to the letter agree with what she's saying, that there's no way to really be in the right with these people. Okay, that you can't really be a woman, and you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So for example, she says that the women that would come to her in her practice, these women in their 20s, they needed to date with intention. Date with intention, she says, because what was happening was they would come in and they would be dating, and then they would go out with a young man and they go on a few dates and they would sleep with the young man, and then they would come in brokenhearted and crying the next session because the young man, he wants to, now he doesn't have any, he's no longer to be found, and they're crying their eyes out and they're brokenhearted. And this is an example of what she says they could avoid by, quote, dating with intention. What does that mean? Is this like the rules and strategy and all that bullshit? I mean, because it sounds to me like these women are dating with intention. They're dating with the intention of having a sustainable, meaningful relationship. And the men are dating with the intention of fucking. So you see that that's been an age-old like dilemma for young people. Like this is not a new thing, all right? But according to Dr. Spier, somehow if young women, if they just have the right mindset, they can control men, what happens around them, and then they won't have to complain and cry on her couch, whatever. I'm so sick of this. This is a favorite um personality disorder diagnosis of Dr. Spear. She spends a lot of time on it. She's claiming that it's on the rise, without a lot of like analysis of why that might be. Okay, so one of the things that I agree with her on is that cluster B is on the rise in the population of which I am a part, and I think it's because child rearing has been neglected. I think for at least 2 generations, households have been under too much economic stress. I think that women came out of the home and into the workforce too rapidly, and that the narrative later was that it was due to women's liberation, when in fact there were some neoliberal drivers of that. So a one income household would no longer suffice. Okay, but at any rate, these are the criteria, the DSM criteria for borderline personality disorder. A person supposedly needs 5 of 9. This diagnosis is under attack. It's a controversy. It's something that's getting on Dr. Spear's nerves if you watch her channel. But it's something that she claims is primarily afflicting women. I think that's a bullshit claim. She says, oh, well, 94, 98% of the people diagnosed with this are women, and I will die on that hill. And I'm like, okay, well, you can metaphorically die on that hill from your ivory tower in Switzerland, or you can come to the United States and you can literally die on a literal hill when you get shot to death by a cluster B male. I wrote an entire book on mass shooters, and the facts still stand. 97 to 98% of them are men. 54% of them have a prior history of domestic violence or some sort of abuse allegation against them. And I've looked at their behavior, and I've listened to clinical interviews, and I've watched documentaries, and I've read enough, and I can honestly tell you that they also have borderline personality disorder traits. Okay, many of them have borderline or narcissistic personality disorder traits. Okay, so at any rate, okay, so right now, what's going on is conservatives in Europe are deploying crime statistics involving recent Muslim immigrants and the rape of white women. I've seen quite a lot about these grooming gangs and human trafficking from various quarters, trigonometry, other types of podcasts, and it's bolstering this sort of white flight narrative about how Europe and these aging Western powers are succumbing to multiculturalism. It's the decline of the West, et cetera, et cetera. So Dr. Spier went from just attacking feminism on its merits to really trying to ally herself with far-right conservative podcasters and commentators, and this is the kind of shit that you're unfortunately going to have to listen to because I did. Here we go.
Say that there is a place for advocacy for women's rights in a non-feminist way.
I think if feminism was really about what feminists claim it is, they would be fighting immigration. That's where the focus would be. Because they're so compassionate and they're so nice. But what about compassion towards rape victims? Now, when I go to Oslo, I can't go certain areas, and you say Germany is much worse. Sweden, lost, rape capital of the world. The hypocrisy reveals what feminism is really about. It's about furthering a very small subset of already very privileged women. I think we can get rid of this word altogether. I don't think there is such a thing as conservative feminism or reactionary feminism. Which rights do I not have in the Western world? I mean, I'm asking you, which rights do I not have? I have more than that. What they mean when they say fight for women's rights, they mean fight for special consideration towards women. But the special consideration that women always got, that was because women sacrifice for their kids. Women make themselves vulnerable.
Would you say that there is a place for...
Okay, so there was that one. And then I'm just going to let this other one play while I make myself some coffee. I'm sorry, I used to have much better video skills. I taught ESL for 3 years, and then just somehow when I leave a job, I just sort of I take on skill sets, and then when I leave a job, I just dump it, and now I'm having to reteach myself. So that's why I feel more comfortable in PowerPoint at this point. But there was this very, very disturbing thing that she did about how celebrities talking about having children, like actresses. Most of these actresses already had kids, so I don't understand what her quibble is, but I'll let you listen to it. It was one of the first few things, and I was like, whoa. I played it for Alan, and he was like, she's crazy. And I was like, wow, I don't know. Let me see if I can find it here. It's like 6 minutes long enough for me to make a coffee. It's just so much shit. Okay, here we go.
There's a strange campaign going on to make women feel good and not mind aging. And I think it's all about to have them delay motherhood or not worry about delaying motherhood. So take a look at this.
I think I'm hotter now than I have ever been. I know that I am.
You are
hotter.
Confirmed.
I'm in my 60s. People think no one looks at you anymore. And the truth of the matter is, I have just as many people who want to sleep with me now as I ever did.
Miles happier than I was. I don't want to.
Helena Bonham Carter.
Too old to what? Yeah. I still feel like I'm in my, early 30s. Of course, you feel put out to pasture if you put all your eggs in the basket of beauty, which is just proxy for youth and fertility, so that you can become a mother, so that you can attract a male. That's going to fade. But you also have motherhood, you have grandmotherhood, you have building a legacy, you have mentoring, you have becoming the matriarch of a family. Those things don't depend on your looks. But here again, women will not take responsibility for the choices that they make.
What kind of story do you think our society tells women about aging? By the time you get to 50, they've just completely,
Shields.
written you off. You're
done.
You are out to pasture.
You're responsible for building a life, for using your leverage in your youth to build a life they'll give you long-term mental stability. But now they cling to
Man
manhood.
is a plan, y'all. A man is a plan.
And then they foul when nature doesn't cooperate. It's just another biological reality that they've thrown on the ice to die. There's nothing I detest more than actresses whining about how unfair the world is, and how difficult it is to be a woman.
Was told also it's going to be over by 40.
Talking
So
to Jodie Foster.
work. But then went straight into menopause, hardcore symptoms in my early 40s after my second child, and felt like if I ever dared to mention that word, I would be branded as, redundant, finished, off to pasture, go to the sidelines. You're not sexy. There's no way you can act anymore. That's, it'd be career suicide to bring that into the room.
Nobody forced you to become an actress. Nobody forced you to choose a business where you're selling your looks. Nobody's forcing you to audition for the maiden roles. Look at Maggie Smith. You can the whole blaming society, blaming social media. Nobody's forcing you into cosmetic surgery.
I don't think
Nobody's forcing you to stay in Hollywood. They made their careers by selling their youth and selling their looks, and now resent the bill that came due. The same coping mechanism as with childlessness. Not having children is psychological.
In one of these interviews, are the women that she's attacking, who've all had children, by the way, sound in any remotely resentful. They're just talking about their experience. Furthermore, this thing about you don't have to audition for the maiden roles. They don't write the roles. I just, for God's sakes.
Painful will cause some form of psychopathology
in
most women.
But
instead of admitting it, they spin the story. It's society that doesn't accept childless women. They're making it difficult for us, and that's why we're struggling. And it's the same thing with aging.
I'm a childless woman, and I'm not struggling. I don't understand. I just don't understand.
I would feel great about myself if it wasn't for society. Flip the genders for a moment. Imagine a 60-year-old man whining on camera that women find him attractive, demanding that society make him feel comfortable. Would we celebrate him? Look at Brad Pitt.
Honey, would we celebrate him? The first time Alan saw this, he was like, that's exactly
Just made his aging a key feature in the story in this new F1 movie. It was amazing. He plays a veteran. He plays into his age. He doesn't whine about it. I'm sorry to show you this. This video just made me a little bit dumber. Drew Barrymore interviews Anna Kendrick about her turning 40.
Are you turning 40?
Okay, and then it just gets worse from there. It just gets worse from there. So I'm gonna cut it off at this point. That is celebs claim. What is this? Celebs claim that I don't know. I'll put the links in the description. Celebs claim that they're victims of aging. Okay, it's a very about 7-minute long sample of what Dr. Spier is about. So back to this claim, though, that Sweden is the rape capital of the world. That really got me going, because I used to be a crime reporter, and I really resent it when people manipulate crime statistics to make political points and their own agendas. Why is my slide not going? I can't move off the slide. Do 13. Where's conservatives in Europe are having a hue and cry over the raping of white women by recent Muslim immigrants, and groomer gangs and human trafficking, and the claims that these recent immigrants just view white women as trash, and they're immodest, and their culture allows them to target them as victims. And then in the United States, however, where we have had so much conservative backlash that we have twice now elected a man named Donald J. Trump as our president, it's sort of like, I put it this way: if conservatives in Europe want to have these 40, 50-year-old what would you even call it? Canards, things that they trot out. They've been saying the same shit since before I was born about multiculturalism and the decline of Western civilization, yada yada yada. I mean, if you want to have that, then we will happily in the US point out that what's going on is an ugly, ugly mirror. We're going to hold it right up to your ugly, fat fucking faces and show you what is the end result of this, okay? Because in the United States right now, an adjudicated rapist and 34-time convicted felon is struggling mightily to hold together the conservative party that some claim usurped and others just claim is the epitome of, and his executive functioning, literally his executive functioning, while Congress demands that we get the details of his involvement and the involvement of other powerful, wealthy men in one of the world's largest and most depraved sex trafficking rings. But fuck us, woke feminists, right? Fuck us. After I learned from Dr. Spier that Sweden is the rape capital of the world, I decided to go and investigate. And I was like, holy hell, whoa, what is going on with rape convictions and immigrants in UK, Germany, Sweden? It's quite disturbing. It's off the charts disturbing. And I have put together a chart for you. So at first I was tempted to say, this is not a race problem. In Europe, y'all have a religion problem. Okay. I am not, I'm an atheist, and I'm an equal opportunity religion phobe. I'm an Islamophobe, I'm a Judeophobe, I'm a Christophobe. That's where I'm at. And there's about 8 hours worth of videos if you want to get into that on my channel. But that is a gross oversimplification of what is going on. So first of all, let's talk about the stats. In Britain, 25% of rape convictions belong to immigrants, although it's not conclusive if they are recent Muslim immigrants or not, because there's no data on recency. Some countries report people from Muslim, quote, backgrounds, and the way that they record that data is by assigning Muslim to their country of origin, nationality. So if they're coming from a majority Muslim country and they're marked as a national of that country upon immigrating to Europe, that's how they will be recorded. And this is sort of problematic, as you can imagine, for statisticians and people who care about data and facts. However, it is, like I said, very disturbing, because if you look at that, 25% of rape convictions in Europe, then you look at the amount of the population that is actually a Muslim immigrant, and it's 3 to 4%, you can see that that seems wildly disproportionate. Hence, it feeds the sensational narrative of white flight coming out of this conservative corner. In Germany, it's 38, 40%. Again, I've listed Sweden was off the charts, but there's reasons for that. 58%. 58% assigned to 5.5 or 6.5% of the population is truly disturbing. Now, the reason why I have a major, major problem with this, it's because I'm part of these people's American audience, where it is in fact the obverse, okay? A lot of blogs and left-wing publications will cite that 95.4% of rape convictions in the US belong to native-born US citizens, but that is misleading. I investigated the data with the help of ChatGPT, and there are caveats. However, I want to say that just looking at sensational crime narratives and rape and using that as the sole basis of an anti-immigration or pro-immigration argument is stupid. It's wrong. It's dumb. It doesn't take into account the overall needs of the population. It doesn't take into account demographics, and particularly projections of what that country's going to need in the future. So you have to look at what are labor needs. How is the economy going to function? You know, what jobs are going to be filled, and so on and so forth. So let's move on. Interested, I made a slide just of the sources for the previous slides chart. And yes, I did use ChatGPT. ChatGPT pointed out that the less than 5% of rape convictions belong to immigrants is problematic for the US because the data does not exist at the national level. Neither the FBI nor the Bureau of Justice Statistics sort and publish stats using an offender's citizenship status. So we don't have a lot of national data, but people have looked, for example, at Texas, and this holds true for other states, it's multi-state data, that immigrant conviction rates are actually lower than native born for sex crimes. That's coming from the Cato Institute. So it's hardly a left-wing spin. Okay, there's just not objective data to support that we have this problem. And you can just point out, you can track it back to religion, you could parse it that way. The majority of these immigrants, illegal or otherwise, are coming from countries in in South America and Central America, where they tend to have, a majority Christian, many of them Catholic background, and India. That's what ChatGPT told me. So we don't appreciate these narratives because, we're not in Europe. But I mean, I really just do not like it either which way. I don't care how you slice it. I'm uncomfortable with people telling me what I should and shouldn't care about as an American woman and muddying the waters with all this sort of, I think, is very dicey racial rhetoric. Okay. But here in America, just to reiterate, the obverse is true. We do not have a rape crisis because of Trinidad or who else is being blamed? We have a hysterical set of psychopaths running the government, perpetuating lie after lie after lie, but it's not really working out very well. And I certainly don't feel safer. Do you feel safer, honey? No. Okay. So back to me being a crime reporter and resenting when people trot out crime statistics to serve their political narratives. Framing is everything, okay? No European country collects crime statistics by religion, so that's something to think about. And Sweden expanded its rape law in 2018 due to a bipartisan initiative. It used to be the case that they were classifying rape as a crime only if the interaction involved force, threat of force, violence, intimidation, coercion. So something like a person got really drunk and passed out, and then somebody had sex without their consent, that wouldn't have qualified as rape. So they reformed their definition of rape, which altered their statistics in 2018, which is something that you need to bear in mind when you hear Dr. Spier and others claim Sweden is the rape capital of the world. Also, my husband pointed out that Trump has made such claims about Sweden's decline and how it's no longer safe, all the same bullshit talking points. And he sent me a wonderful article from Euronews. It's a fact-checking article. Apparently, Sweden is overall still one of the safest countries in the world, ranks 35th out of 163, and of all the top 10 safest countries in the world, Sweden still ranks. Okay, so we're going to get into what is actually the blind spot at work here, and where maybe possibly the rape capital of the world, if there is one, where that actually is. I want to just tell you some of the stats that I already told you in a different way, so that you can know, what framing is all about. So, for example, in Germany, we're 38. of rape convictions belong to an immigrant. I could also say, according to the same data, that although they are making a mighty effort of it, Muslim men who have immigrated to Germany are still not able to outcompete native German men in raping women. Okay, another way to say that is, if you are in Germany and if you are a woman, you're still more likely to be raped by a native-born German than by an immigrant man. This is all the same information. I have just stated the same thing to you in 3 different ways, but the way that I state it sure does matter, doesn't it? Another very important point, women in migrant communities in Europe are statistically much more likely to be victims of sexual assault. I have a source here. So, where is the rape capital of the world? I have a chart here, but I have the entire right side of the screen is devoted to caveats. Okay, because it's important to understand that there is no rape capital of the world, because globally, people who look at crime for what it is do not think like this. It's the simplest way I can put it to you. Okay. There are too many differences in the way that rape is recorded and reported. So, for example, Bangladesh, a majority Muslim country that has a major problem with gang rape. But we also know that a lot of these gang rapes are overlooked by the sexist police force there. So we're not going to get good data out of that, okay? We also know that Saudi Arabia has, say, things called porta potty parties, where they recruit and pay women that they fish for on OnlyFans, and then this treat them like porta potties at these massive debauched parties, right? Okay, but again, we don't know. Different countries have different standards and different legal systems. So in some cultures, people are not going to report. In other countries, there's all kinds of international reporting problems. We don't know what, like, I mean, look at what would North Korea tell us and why? Okay, just to offer a non-Muslim example, this, let's just move on. It's worth, and it's not worth much in my opinion, worldpopulationreview.com has compiled a list of countries with rapes per 100,000 based on 2023 data. And if you look, yeah, Sweden is like, holy shit, but Germany, nah. Again, you can manipulate data any which way, you can spin it however you want. And it's just your intention, right? Statistics with intention. For my money, it's Congo, because for more than 2 decades now, there's been a lot of overflow of violence from the Rwandan genocide and the Hutu and the Tutsi civil conflict. So rape in the DRC is not just a crime, it's a weapon of war. It's been a long-standing public health and humanitarian crisis. A number of international agencies, watchdogs, NGOs, and governments of all stripes, conservative, liberal, whatever, these are like serious independent watchers, have clocked rape in there at like something like 800,000 to 1.68 million women have been raped at this point. We know this, it's reliable data, it's tragic, and it's often overlooked by Western powers. We've sort of turned a blind eye to it because, at least in the United States, Congo doesn't serve our national interest to intervene. And let's face it, many of the victims and perpetrators alike are Black people. So we just basically, I mean, it's like Haiti. It's in our own backyard, but I don't think we get involved. And so, and I pointed out that I wanted to thank the Kavernacle. I put a link to his YouTube video at the bottom. He will explain, he does a much better job than I at explaining the context and the background here to the conflict. Okay, it's just truly harrowing stuff. Okay, the irony here is that there are groups, many feminist groups, are making inroads in the Congo, as well as religious types, nuns. I read articles about religious organizations. But a lot of feminist groups now are on top of this. Women for Women International. I mean, people who've been doing aid work, and they're the ones actually going in there. I wish I could find it again, but a few weeks ago I found an article in The Guardian about sisterhood in the Congo, Congolese feminists taking the lead and doing what they can to rehabilitate perpetrators and victims and mitigate the conflict that's generating this. Okay, this is not a religious problem. This is a war problem. This is a basic human predation problem. Okay, like so much of the other stuff that gets spun. Okay, the other irony that I find in what Dr. Spier has to say about Sweden being the rape capital of the world is that, okay, so fuck, you're so upset that these Muslim immigrant communities are swamping your white Western um purity land, right? And they're coming in and they're I guess after what, your welfare state benefits, is that what you're going to claim? So they come in, and the irony here is that feminists in Europe are going to have to be the ones who take the lead and go into those communities and help them assimilate by teaching the men and the women alike that women have value, inherent value in and of themselves, and they should take pride in themselves, and they should value things like educational attainment. And maybe that early wifery and motherhood being deferred for a time so that these women can obtain job skills, education, make them, more or less on par with their Western counterparts. Well, that would be, according to Dr. Spier, teaching them bad values, right? Because she's basically preaching these traditional values, they need to be foisted back on women of the West. Subjugation is what she's arguing for, that women in society will be much happier and better off with these traditional values. So what is what is the solution then, Dr. Spier? Because it seems to me that those immigrant communities that you're so upset about, well, they're teaching you what you're preaching. Let's take a break from rape for a minute. One of my favorite TV shows of all time, probably the best TV show of all time, in my opinion, is the show called Newsroom. And in Newsroom, there is a character who has some, let's say, issues, problems. He does see a psychiatrist. Mostly he wants sleeping pills. And these are his problems. He's got some impulsivity issues. In one episode, he gets high and then goes on air to announce very important news. He has a passive suicide attempt. In one episode, he takes too much aspirin and antidepressants. He ODs. He has relationship problems. Most of his relationships are pretty short term. One could accuse him of being promiscuous, and he can't reconcile with his true love, his ex. He has irritability and outbursts. He's a moral crusader. He's an Avenger type. He's on a mission to civilize. He's incredibly obsessed with his image, fame-seeking, overly concerned with his parasocial relationships and his fans. Does not seem to have a stable self-image. He doesn't understand that when he barks at people and jumps down their throat, they might perceive him to be a jerk. Just doesn't occur. He shows a willingness to manipulate others, particularly in service of justice or the truth, and particularly on air. And in one episode, he even hallucinates. Can you guess who this character is? If you are familiar with this show, who am I talking about? About the hero of the show. His name is Will McAvoy. And does anyone, tell me, does anyone ever watch Newsroom and say to themselves, I think Will McAvoy has borderline personality disorder? Does anyone do that, honey? Does anyone watch Newsroom and say, did you watch Newsroom and say, I think that Will McAvoy has borderline personality disorder?
I haven't, no.
And why do you think that might be?
Just a guy.
This is a guy. Thank you. Okay, so this is what I'm getting at. So a borderline personality disorder is the favorite bludgeon, the favorite tool to put the hammer down on social justice warriors of these people. But it's not going to be a tool, hopefully, for very long, because it's under attack. And so many people have looked at the differential rates of diagnosis in men and women, as well as the incidence of child abuse in people who are diagnosed. I mean, it's questionable whether or not this should be in the DSM, and there is a campaign to have it removed. This campaign really bothers Dr. Spier. You can watch her channel for that. In fact, this number 4 is where I got that from her. Okay. I had already read Dr. Jessica Taylor's entire book on this subject. It's very good, and I like it a lot. It's called Sexy but Psycho. How the patriarchy uses women's trauma against them. She's a doctorate in psychology. She's a British woman. And she says, I quote, I do not believe that women and girls who begin to behave, think, or feel differently after they have been subjected to male violence are ill, disordered, or problematic at all. Instead, I would argue that it is completely natural and normal to be distressed, traumatized, and changed by these crimes against them, even if it changes them for the rest of their lives. This is a quote from Dr. Karen Williams, who runs a clinic, a women's only clinic. There is no symptom that a borderline personality disorder person has that a PTSD patient doesn't also have. So I made a questionnaire based on my own childhood experiences for people who are having trouble deciding whether or not, we should listen to people about their childhood trauma and abuse, and maybe it's all overblown. You can read my questionnaire. You can infer things about my childhood, and I think I will just let you. I think I'm just gonna let you read. If you want to read more about my childhood, I'll show you my memoir later. But this backdrop of violence is what I have in common with my ex-husband and what we both have in common with the fictional character Will McAvoy. This is the second part of my questionnaire. So when I was a little girl, my parents divorced when I was about 2.5 years old. I think by the time that I was 3, my father had remarried, and I had 2 stepsisters, Trina and Mitzi. Trina was older than us, about 11 years, or she was a teenager. She was a young teenager. And Mitzi and I were 3 weeks apart in age. Mitzi was like my little blonde twin. Our parents divorced by the time that we were in first grade. and we went to separate schools, so I didn't see Mitzi very much again. And then, interestingly enough, we went to the same high school, although by that time, even though we had been very, very close, we had nothing in common and not much to say to each other. I did find it interesting that after we graduated from high school, within 6 months of each other, we both married, and we both married very, very large men. I wonder why. I don't know if Mitzi is still married. I know she had children. She lived in our hometown. I was friends with her on Facebook for a while, but I don't do social media as much anymore. So, my ex-husband and I have been divorced since 2009. We did date twice after the divorce. I haven't spoken to him since 2013. I think the last time I texted him was 2013. So, you know, if you're looking for dirt, you're not going to find more than you've already gotten. I don't really know him anymore. That's the truth. I haven't read any of his books since The Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism, and I don't really follow his articles and things. I don't track him a lot. Sometimes I do like to see what's up. I read reviews of his last book, The Big White Ghetto something 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 book. I get tickled by reviews of his books for some reason. This one kind of bothered me. Uh, it's it's a it bothers me because we had that trauma bond. That's what we had. That's the demeaning term that psychologists associate with that kind of relationship, where two people come from a similar household background and then find each other, and then they're terrible to each other, and then they learn, and then they move on. So someone wrote this in the Amazon reviews about his book, that he had a traumatic upbringing in Lubbock, Texas, at the hands of parents who were seriously dysfunctional. And he weaves this fact into his book here and there. And one gains the impression that his view of rural and urban America is dramatically distorted by his trauma. While he has entertaining and eloquently retold experiences here and there in a way that sometimes bring to mind Hunter S. Thompson, Williamson's experiences are seen through the extraordinarily thick and distorting lens of his past pain. Well, where's your book? That's my question. And who the hell are you to invalidate what he has to say because he can't help that. I couldn't help that. It just makes me wonder. This is why I really found comfort in studying literature rather than psychology, because it was a freeing field where, there are a number of writers. I could look at their bios: Dorothy Parker, Elizabeth Wurtzel, Sylvia Plath. People posthumously try to diagnose them. And I'm like, why? Why are you doing that? Literary critics don't care so much. They value the work. And that's why I liked English and being an English major. A little bit of a non sequitur, but these are things that I'm ambivalent about that really piss off a lot of feminists, I would say. Abortion, number one. I have made other videos about that. I'm not ambivalent about that. I fully support a woman's right to have an abortion. I'm just not on board with a lot of pro-choice arguments that, life does not begin at conception, and it's not the taking of a life. And I don't sit well. I just don't. I like honesty. Okay. It is the taking of a life. It's a right that you used to have to take this life. It's your right to take it, and you don't owe anyone an explanation. They went so far in the direction of trying to appease the general public and kowtow and make sure people were always saying things like, the majority of people who have abortions are already women who've already given birth. And I'm just like, so what? I mean, just grow the fuck up and let's be honest and lay it out on the table. So people don't like me for that. I became ambivalent about the Me Too movement, and I've written about that. I tried to address this ambivalence in a very viral letter to Jeffrey Goldberg that I sent about my ex-husband several years ago. I will repost that to Substack. But ultimately, then I had friends who wanted to argue with me about. I kind of tracked like the death of Me Too, like many commentators, to the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. And this is my take on the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. Well, first of all, when I saw a woman screaming, cornering Jeff Flake in an elevator and screaming at Jeff Flake, I knew feminists were going to lose this one. I knew women and feminists were going to lose hard because I saw that and I was like, why are you screaming at Jeff Flake? He's not a perpetrator. I screamed at Bill Cosby like that, but Bill Cosby goddamn raped like scores of women. Okay, we know that. And I would never scream at a lawmaker who hasn't done me harm. The level of aggression, people can call it justified, but I knew we were going to lose. And the other thing that made me uncomfortable about the Brett Kavanaugh hearings was this. Legally speaking, Helen Andrews she's a conservative commentator. She has called the Me Too movement a challenge to the rule of law, which is obvious. It's like choice now. I mean, this shit's still going up. She's still going around. I'm like, hello, have you been paying attention at all to what? I mean, have you been paying? You think Me Too was? She's right, but it was a challenge, and now what we're facing is actually the collapse coming from the other side, right? Okay. Just there's no arguing. There's no getting around that. Conservatives elected somebody who is a fascist dictator who is crashing the rule of law in the United States. Own it, take accountability for it. Even my ex-husband knows better. Okay? I'm not saying he's a great guy. I don't even fucking know. I'm just saying I knew that something was off when it all culminated in the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. And I had people say, oh my God, can you believe that we're going to, and I said, yeah. What happened with Brett Kavanaugh was just and right because his accuser was talking about events that happened while he was still a minor. So I did find her testimony truthful but irrelevant. There's a reason why in our criminal justice system, we process minors differently and accord them more leniency. And so my take on it was that he probably did behave in that way. And I had great sympathy for Christine Blasey Ford for having experienced that. But because she didn't choose to report it, and because it didn't get adjudicated as a crime, I don't see how the offender, Brett Kavanaugh, who had no other accusers come forward, deserved to lose the progress in his entire legal career. And don't like him, but that's my take. Another person I'm ambivalent about is Lionel Shriver. She's a total, right now, oh my God, I could tear her a new one. But I do like some of her books. But I'm not going to read a lot of her other stuff because I think it's just basically become cheesy and polemic, and I'm not interested. A lot of psychiatric diagnoses end up being nothing but stereotypes. But stereotypes are powerful. Stereotypes govern cultural perceptions, which in turn feed the zeitgeist, which in turn create a lot of political froth and turmoil. I recently read a book that referenced Walter Lippmann. he did a lot of work on stereotypes, the stereotyping process, and he's cited in a lot of psychological and sociological literature. So this is how the stereotyping process works. And I would ask you to, well, if you want to listen to what Dr. Spier says, I would ask you to keep this process in the back of your mind and I would ask you to differentiate. Is somebody having a legitimate medical expertise here, or is this what's going on? Mind that stereotyping process. Let's revisit what's going on with the narratives about Muslim immigrants raping white women in Europe and how we should shut down immigration in those countries and in this country because, hey, bear in mind that even if all of those stats ring absolutely true and there's no problems, there's no social justice problems with policing or reporting, only like 0.51% of the world's Muslims live in these three countries: Germany, Sweden, Britain, and only 2 to 3% of the world's Muslims live in Europe. Furthermore, according to Pew Research, by 2030, it's not going to change that much. So maybe tone it down a little bit. For these reasons, I prefer literature to politics. But that said, I can't help but point out that, if Dr. Speer wants to make the argument that I have no right as an American woman to get upset about my rights, and I have all the rights that I'm just begging for special consideration and nobody's taking away my rights. I mean, I would just, what the hell? I mean, the Dobbs decision alone was reason enough for me to get up and leave my country. But this is what's going on. This is my hall of dysfunctional right-wing shitheads, incels, and religious zealots. Okay, so let's do this. Top left. This is Doug Wilson. He's an evangelical pastor. I think he's in Idaho. He says that women should not have the right to vote. This is top right, Joel Webbin. Same type of person, evangelical pastor. He says women should not have the right to read books that their husbands don't read first or approve of. Below him, bottom right, Nick Fuentes, 27-year-old right-wing podcaster who's bought and paid for by bots and Russians, and has really boosted his profile in recent months, has come out to Piers Morgan as a virgin. He's never had sex with a woman. Nevertheless, he's pretty sure that women shouldn't have the right to consent or refuse sex to a man. He tweeted after the last presidential election, "Your body, my choice forever," gleefully gloating that Kamala Harris would never be president because there will never be a female president in the United States. And then there's like Mr. Goddamn malignant narcissist Joker, couture Jordan Peterson, whom I used to very much listen to his lectures and I really valued him back 10 years ago. I was okay with it. And then, now I can't, he's on camera discussing with author Louise Perry, should we make rape a property crime again, like in the Bible? What would happen if, come on. Give me a fucking break. And I'm not losing any rights, right? My rights are not under attack, just basic bodily autonomy, voting, shit like that. So nothing to be concerned about, right? Which just brings me back to my favorite, my goat, Margaret Atwood. author of The Handmaid's Tale. She's enjoying quite a moment. I recently watched her be interviewed by Swisher, but this is a quote from her. Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. In the spirit of Margaret Atwood, I wrote a job description. Is this a job application that I put together for Dr. Spier in case, she decides she wants to, maybe she gets empty nest syndrome, wants to go back to work. I put together a job for her. It's the job of auntie. And she can, I mean, or if any of you out there, want to respond, you can drop me a line, lb.crystalfink@gmail.com. Enjoyed this presentation and want to learn more, I have some suggested reading for you. The first is I thought that there was a book by this title. The other day I was loading up my Kindle and I thought that there was a book that was Why Nations That Fail Women Fail, and I was unable to find it. But then I found this website, and it is about the links between repression of women's rights and economic stagnation of violent force and extremism in populations. There's plenty of work. This is another book that's in my to-do list. Cynthia Miller Idris, Man Up, The New Misogyny and the Rise of Violent Extremism. You can read my work, Trainwreck, but I'm going to republish it, and this over here on the right is the cover for it. That's what I prefer to call it. No safe words. There are works that have been of interest to me is this book by Sadie Doyle, also called Trainwreck. Trainwreck is about how the media and the paparazzi often basically ruin the lives of young women and girls who become celebrities through a lot of sexist, enslaving narratives. So putting vulnerable young women in the spotlight, and then basically like things that happened to Britney Spears, Miley Cyrus, the amount of like scrutiny on them and the objectification of them means that they are damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? So it's a lot of harassment actually, and then we turn around and blame them for the harassment. So the victim blaming compounds the initial offense, if you will. Anyway, she's much better at stating all this than I am. Another book over here on the left, I recently read it, was part of my husband's collection. Because we couldn't get the digital version, I read it. It's Prisoners of Hate, The Cognitive Basis of Anger, Hostility, and Violence. Dr. Spier, her bio lists that she's interested in cognitive behavioral therapy and an expert in that. So is Dr. Beck. I just liked this book a lot. These are my books. All of them are available on Amazon. Thank you for listening, and thank you again to the Kavernacle. This is a picture I took of myself. I was bored one day and I wanted a Guy Fawkes mask, but I didn't have one, so I made this goofy picture of myself using makeup.